Everyone is stressed, both by the immediate changes in our lives due to the coronavirus and by the unknown that seems to be all around us. It certainly is waiting for us up ahead. I've been thinking about possible longer-term ramifications of this pandemic on levels beyond our day-to-day lives. There are a lot of areas to explore, and right now I want to have a look at how some might exploit this upheaval by pandemic for their own benefit and to the detriment of us. First to come to mind is Donald Trump. Given that his sole focus is on what is good for himself, I can easily imagine him using this national emergency to cancel the general election in November and make himself king. Congress and the courts are going to have to grow a spine in order to stop such an outright theft of America, and I have my doubts about whether they're up to it. Trump Republican legislators have shown conclusive proof that they aren't capable of the task, and we have to wonder if the Trump-stuffed Supreme Court would have the courage to decide against him. Trump has toyed with this idea of never leaving office, and that was before there was a pandemic he could use as an excuse. Next on the list is Russia. I don't know what Vladimir Putin might try, but he's all about self-enrichment and restoring his country to USSR status on the world stage. Read ego puffing. His methodology doesn't much include growing Russia or the welfare of his people, but instead he's all about taking down other countries. It's the classic inferiority complex bully tactic, making someone else less than in order to be on top. Perhaps he'll have Russian tanks invade neighboring countries while we're weak. There's nothing new about Russia doing that sort of thing. Maybe he'll extort European countries by withholding Russian gas and oil next winter. I'm not clear what he might do to take down Western democracies and the U.S., other than stealing elections using his cyber thugs, but I bet he is. China is entirely about world domination, and the U.S. is both its biggest obstacle and its easiest tool. They will come out of the pandemic months before the U.S. with 1.5 billion workers who are healthy, hungry, and subservient to their manipulative, diabolical government. China has issued government subsidies to help Chinese companies underprice American goods, and they took over 3.7 million jobs from the U.S. just since 2001. Plus, they're holding $1.1 trillion of U.S. debt, about a quarter of our total foreign debt. That's a lot of leverage. Would they crack down on Hong Kong or swallow Taiwan during America's time of weakness? As with Russia, I'm not clear what they might do to harm others for their benefit, including harming the U.S., but I'm confident President Xi is. What about North Korea? The coming months might be just the time when Kim will make a move on South Korea to annex it, to create one Korea, knowing that the U.S. is only hobbling along in a weakened state and can't or won't do much about it. Here are the key questions. First, who in our government is thinking about such things? Given the bumbling, reactionary, transactional nature of this administration, is anyone thinking strategically and beyond next Thursday? Second, are there plans on the shelf to deal with these threats, and are they up to date? And if not, who will do something about that and when? And third, will anyone pull the trigger on these plans if one outcome of doing so is unfavorable to Trump's personal welfare? For example, no Trump Tower Moscow. Who and what else do you think might be in a position to seize advantage over the U.S. in the next 1 to 3 years? Put your notions in the comments section of the printed blog to help us all see clearly. Now a long-term ramifications mini-feature. There's something about we human beings that, whatever the issue, we typically don't really get it until it's relatable to us personally. So it was for Pharaoh enduring the plagues, as Exodus tells us. He wasn't motivated until the 10th plague, the slaying of the firstborn, which took his own son. That was when it was personal enough for him. That's when he got it. That same inability to get it without feeling a personal impact is with us today. Mark and Heaven Freelo of Kenner, Louisiana, weren't much moved by claims from our medical community of the coming and rapidly spreading pandemic, and many in their town scoffed at warnings, believing them to be just political ploy. They did that right up until the moment when Mark wound up in the hospital and was diagnosed with COVID-19. He hasn't been able to breathe on his own since then. And friends and colleagues are wondering if contact with him has caused them to be infected. Heaven and her neighbors aren't scoffing at the virus now, but it had to come to up close and personal for them to really get it. As the author of the report about Mark and Heaven Freelo writes, quote, "Crises are political only until they're personal," close quotes. And people scoffing and refusing to believe the experts until they themselves are touched by this disease will inevitably be cavalier or worse about transmission. Their flip disregard will make it spread faster and farther. This age of disbelief in science, learning, experts, and provable fact is fertile ground for enormous suffering and unnecessary death, and that's a very long-term ramification. You can read the full story about the Freelos through a link in the written post. Finally, from the "I wish I were making this up" file. At his press conference on Monday, March 23rd, President Trump explained that George Washington kept 2 desks and implied that one was used to run his personal business. He compared himself to Washington and whined that nobody complained about what Washington did. Then he reminded everyone for the umpteenth time that he has refused the presidential salary and whined that no one has thanked him for doing that. In other words, in a time of worldwide sickness and death and economic hardship, a time of disruption and fear when all in this nation are looking for leadership, someone to trust to have their welfare in his heart, someone with clarity to lead us out of this darkness. Instead, it's all about Trump and how he's a poor victim. Yes, our governors and mayors are stepping up and providing wonderful leadership, but there are some things only the federal government can do. We need reason to have confidence that they're being done to the very best of our ability as a nation. Leadership is a peculiar thing, and it's most necessary in times of crisis. If it doesn't show up soon, what are the long-term ramifications of that? I'm Jack Alshuler.